Hello and welcome back to another episode of From the Field. I'm not too sure how many of you are watching at the moment because we did a much shorter introduction than we normally do. We normally do a 5-minute one, but we're all running a little bit behind schedule these days. So hopefully, as this fills out as I am talking. So just a couple of hygiene things. Summit was 2 weeks ago. You can still watch a lot of the content that was delivered through Summit on demand. So if you just go to the website, just register, sign in or whatnot, and actually just watch any of the sessions that interest you or any of the keynotes to actually see what we're actually happening, any of the initiatives that we are doing. So I am the host, Casey Orr. So I work with SMB businesses, primarily in the South Island and Lower North Island. I'm located out of the Wellington office in New Zealand. Let me see if I've got my walking billboard shirt on. Yep. You have to be a walking billboard these days. So I have with me today Chris Creamer, who is also a fellow solution architect that is out working out of the Wellington office, and he has some pretty exciting stuff talking about doing a demo and doing some budgetary consideration, especially for people that are newer to the cloud but still have a lot of that technical background. That's going to be awesome. And the other thing is at the end of the session, we'll be talking about training and some initiatives that we have going on there, such as 50% off for certifications. How do you get trained up? How can you further your skill set? But enough about me blabbering on. I'll pass over to Chris to actually introduce himself and then go into any content. Feel free to comment. I have changed a couple of my setup. Because there was a lot of background noise getting picked up on my microphone. So if you do hear anything like that, just feel free to comment and be like, hey, you need to do some more work. I have done a bunch of it, moving the mic closer so you can't hear me typing or doing clicking and whatnot. So yeah, and ask questions. Like that, the really key thing for these streams is to ask questions to get that engagement. It doesn't necessarily have to be about what Chris is talking about, but if he does make a point and you want further explanation, or there's a little bit of a tangent there that is related to what you do day to day, then please do type that question, and then we will do our best to ask it. Anyway, over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Casey. As Casey mentioned, I'm a AWS solutions architect here in Wellington. I mainly work with our enterprise customers in the financial services industry. But today I'm not going to talk about enterprises or financial services. Last year, I was working with some new customers, and what was quite interesting is that we had these customers who have been building websites, who have been building machine learning, who have been doing stuff in their own data center, and they wanted to get started on AWS, right? So the question became, okay, I know how to build things. How do I build things in AWS? And I had similar experience with some of my ex-colleagues where they're going, I know how to build stuff, but how do I get started? And AWS is the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform, right? And we have over 200 fully featured services from data centers globally. And what that means is you can build any type of application on AWS. But that also means that if you want to get started, it's a bit of a challenge. Like, where do you start? So let me share my screen here quickly. Um, and that's my topic today, right? Is like, if you know how to build something today but you don't have experience with AWS, how do you get started? And more importantly, how do you know what it will cost you? I think that's something that worries people a bit. If they're just starting out, will it exhaust all my credit card limit? How do you control all of that? So I want to discuss a bit about how you go about starting on AWS. So what are some of the AWS foundational things that you should know to have a good start? You don't have to know all the 200 services. Like, how do you approach this? And then I want to jump into cost control. If you're starting, how do you ensure you are operating within your budget? And depending on how we go for time, I'll probably also do a demo of building a basic website, trying to take the learnings as we go along, and how do you put into practice. As Casey mentioned, would love this to be interactive. If we go as far as just cost control and not able to cover the website demo, that's fine, as long as you get some good value out of this.
Yeah, actually, Hyperlink has just jumped in saying that there was a big worry in the past for him to afraid to accidentally leave a resource on and blow the credit card funds. So yeah, I also have a lot of these questions filtered from students and like professionals wanting to do some self learning. So yeah, it's definitely a big concern.
Yeah, and we have had cases, right? Like someone is starting with machine learning, and machine learning sometimes uses a lot of GPU machines. We had this case. I think someone started something, and then they went away on a holiday, and for 2 weeks things were running, and they were a bit surprised. And I think it's just learning how to avoid those kind of scenarios is what I want to talk about today. So yeah, there's a bit of how do you get started, and then also a bit of cost control. So if you're new to AWS, I think the first part will be very valuable, and obviously the second part. But if you know a bit about AWS, then definitely the cost control will be a useful thing. So how do you get started, right? And this is the kind of mindset I like to tell people to have. Um, you always keep security in mind. That's the first thing you should always have in your mind is how do I keep my things secure? And that's no different to building anywhere. The second thing is cost optimize, because you're going to pay for what you're using. You should always keep that in mind. If you don't need to have something running, then switch it off, and don't pay for that. Logging, you should always think about how do I log of what my applications are doing, especially when you're starting out. If something goes wrong, you need a way to get more information about what could have gone wrong. And then start with what you know, right? So if you know how to build a website, then go and intentionally look for resources that help you build websites on AWS. And that way you're not learning an entirely new thing. You know, you have some of the knowledge. You're just learning the few things in AWS. Likewise, if you know how to do machine learning, then go look for machine learning things on AWS. And we have lots of hands-on labs. I've put a link there that gives you tutorials on how to do things. And one of the demo that I have in the end is from there. So I just wanted to take a demo, take a tutorial that's there, and then do it as a demo to show you how you can go about getting started. So first, let's talk about the AWS foundational things, and these things are useful whether you are building a website, whether building a web service, you're doing IoT, you're doing machine learning, anything, data analytics, you will come across some of these things, and they are AWS account. You can't escape that. You have to know what that is. Region and availability zones. You should know security, in particular identity access and management. A little bit of networking. I won't cover that in detail, but you will come across this thing called virtual private cloud. And it also really helps you to know the difference between self-managed, AWS managed, and serverless. And I'll go into a bit of detail around that. And then also what's very unique about cloud when compared to traditional data centers is elasticity, right? When there's more demand, you can provision more capacity in most instances automatically. So you have more resources to save the demand, and when you don't need them, you can reduce the capacity. And we usually say the way you pay for them is pay per use, but it's really pay for what's running. So if you have 100 servers running and you're only using two, maybe you are paying for the 100 servers and not just for the two servers. So even though we usually say pay per use, it's pay for what is running. And we look at this into a bit more detail in as we go along. AWS account. So AWS account is the way which each of our customers get an explicit security boundary for all their resources. So if you sign up for AWS, you get an AWS account. I sign up for AWS, I get my own. Casey will get his own. And by default, anything in my AWS account is not shared with anyone else. And that's like your environment. So that's like the starting point. You have to have an AWS account. Now, over time, if you're an organization or even just doing your personal projects, you'll use more and more accounts to segregate functionality, uh, to support different teams, to support different environments. So imagine if you a bank, you might have a development environment, a test environment, production environment, and they will have their own AWS account. So it's a way to separate the resources that you're using. The second thing that you will need to know is the AWS region. So AWS has this concept of a region, which is a physical location around the world where we cluster our data centers. and we call each group of logical data center an availability zone. So each AWS region consists of multiple isolated and physically separate availability zone within a geographic region. So today for New Zealand customers, the obvious region to use is Sydney region, which has 3 availability zone. Very soon in 2024, we will have a region in New Zealand as well with 3 availability zones. So uh, uh, definitely we have a lot of choice in this part of the world. The availability zone itself is a one or more discrete data center with redundant power, networking, and connectivity in an AWS region. And what it gives you a way to build highly available and fault tolerant systems, right? So these availability zones are, are, s- are separate in a meaningful way that if something happens to one of them, the other ones will continue to run, but they are still close enough that you have quite low latency. So when you deploy your applications, then it makes sense to deploy on more than one availability zone. But this is again another concept that you will come across when you're working with AWS. I wanted to give you, I wanted to show you this picture. When you are looking at AWS resources online or documentation, usually you will see this diagram, which is which represents the cloud, a particular region, and then within the region you have availability zone. So uh, this is just to show you that when you look at some documentation, some architecture, it might be represented on a diagram like this. And what it means is what I was talking about earlier. You have a region, and within the region, you have multiple availability zones. Yeah, Casey, did you want to
Yeah, I was
look
also
into
going
that?
to
Yeah.
say an interesting fact is that each availability zone that is represented by 2A, 2B, and 2C is different per account. So
Yes.
2A for one account will be different for a 2A from another account. And that is to help a balance load, but it's also a security measure. So someone can't try to take all the compute out of one zone and then disrupt someone else. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
very interesting fact there.
Yeah. That is actually a very interesting design to separate them out like that. So that's your regions and availability zones and some other things I have not covered here, like content delivery networks or local zones. But this is all these things together is what we would generally refer as our global infrastructure. Uh, so that's something you'll come across every time you work with AWS. The the other thing that helps you get started, or just when you generally trying to choose the services to build something. As I mentioned, we have a lot of services, over 200 services, and there's more than one way to do the same thing. You can build a website in many different ways, and the way you choose is how would you. It's a choice of uh, control and flexibility versus ease of use. So self-managed is very equivalent to what you might do in a data center or just at home, where you have a virtual machine. And on the virtual machine, you install the operating system and then you install all the software you want to use. So as an example, if you want to use a relational database, let's say SQL Server, you have to install Windows operating system. And then on top of that, you have to install the SQL Server database engine before you do anything. But it also means that now you have to patch the operating system, you have to manage the application. And if you need more servers, because there's more demand, you have to provision more servers. So that's self-managed. The second one is slightly similar. It's AWS managed in the sense that the underlying machine is not managed by you, but you still might need to specify the size of the machine. A good example here is our relational database service. So again, let's say you want to do SQL Server. Instead of provisioning a virtual machine, you can go and provision or use the AWS managed service, RDS, which is the relational database service. And by doing that, what you don't do is you're not installing the operating system, you're not installing the SQL Server itself. By clicking a few buttons, you get that engine by default, but you still have to choose the size of the machine. So it gives you more a more simpler way to do databases because you're not managing machines, uh, and use it as a service. And that's why we say it's AWS managed service. If you go to the other spectrum where there is no notion of a machine or a server, and that's what we call serverless. So again, let's say all you wanted in a database was some sort of a key value storage, an employee database or a product database or something like that, then you can use a service, say DynamoDB, where you actually don't care about machine itself. You just design the table either using a GUI or an API. So you have nothing, no engine to manage. You don't have any patching to do. You don't think about increasing capacity to meet demand or decreasing capacity to meet a smaller demand. All of that happens automatically for you. So those are the kind of three ways that you can do things on AWS. And usually it's best to start from the right hand side, see if you can do your work with the serverless way, because other than being really easy to use, no need for you to do maintenance, but it's also in a grand scheme of things, it's also sustainable. Um, or contributes to the sustainability of our environment, because the machines are not unnecessarily running in our data centers if they don't need to be running. So it's obviously a good choice. The one other thing uh, that you will come across, and you will come across this when you are doing self-managed, is this concept of a virtual private cloud. So we've talked about an account, we've talked about a region. A virtual private cloud is a virtual network within your environment, and it's a way and it closely resembles a traditional network, that it gives you a network boundary within which things are happening. And you would need to use a virtual private cloud, or you will come across this network construct if mainly if you're using some sort of a self-managed or maybe even an AWS managed service. So let's say you want to provision some virtual machines, or EC2 in AWS terminology. Those will usually go inside a virtual private cloud. Now, if you were using a serverless service or tool, then you don't have to think about VPC, because it's managed by AWS. Therefore, they live inside AWS's virtual private cloud, and you don't necessarily need to deal with that networking construct yourself. So I've given two examples here: a serverless compute where AWS Lambda is a service. Another one is a key value database, Amazon DynamoDB. You don't have to care too much about VPC. And then there are a few services that sort of, and again, these two services or those services can be deployed in a particular region, but then there are some services that are global. They don't actually sit inside a particular region. And a good example here is the AWS Identity and Access Management.
Just jumping in quickly, Chris, Kyon TTV raised a really good point. I just want to bring it up on the
Uh,
stream as well. That to also consider adding redundancy for databases and event factor, and that goes just beyond databases as well. High availability and resiliency is something that is quite critical to any type of production application. So making sure if you have a website that is load balanced and has self repair function for using auto scale groups or some type of other load balancing. Yeah, that's really key. And thank you, Kion, for K1, sorry, for bringing it up.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a great point, right? And someone is saying, I wish we had a serverless solution. Tons of servers. Yeah, patching it totally takes those things away, right? If you go onto the serverless path, and also, so I think the when we with our serverless offerings. Uh, what we do by default, the way they are designed is we want to ensure high availability, they're highly fault tolerant, and therefore when they run, they are running out of all the availability zones in the region. So when DynamoDB is running for you behind the scenes, the underlying compute and the infrastructure, they are running from different availability zones. So if there was an outage of an entire availability zone, your DynamoDB will continue to run because it's running from the two other availability zones still. Whereas if you were trying to build something yourself, then like Casey was saying, you then need to think about, okay, I need to put this across multiple availability zones. And in terms of databases, the relational database service that I mentioned briefly, it has options to fail over to another availability zone or another region, or you can have a RAID replica that you can usually easily bring it up and use that as the main database instance if the main or the right instance, something happens with the right instance. So the more services you use on sort of that right hand managed service or serverless, the more options you have with being able to recover from any type of failure. Yeah, a bunch of messy DR plans. Yeah, so I think the more you move towards using managed services, the easier it becomes to plan for disaster recovery and have more fault tolerant systems. So it's good. People can see value in that type of architectures. So that's about services and sort of infrastructure. Now, the one other thing which you always need to understand is security, and in particular identity and access management. Oh, the one thing I didn't mention initially is when you are starting out, you go and find maybe some documentation. You start reading about, okay, how do I sign up to an account? How do I do security? It's there's so much information, so most likely you will not read everything, and you try to get good to the core of the thing. It is always very useful to go and see if that documentation has something about best practices for using this service. So for example, when you sign up to an account, you get what we call a root account, and we always recommend as a best practice is to not use that root account to do your day-to-day work on AWS. You should create another user. So it's always useful to, if you're using any service, a serverless service, a security service, see if there's some documentation and guidance around what are the best practices when you're using this service.
And keep using MFA on the root user.
Yeah, yeah. So identity and access management, what this is, it is essentially about who can access what. By default, when you have any AWS service, or you provision any AWS service, by default, it can't do anything by itself. You have to explicitly say, okay, this service can talk to that database. And what can it do on that database? Maybe it can only read from that database and not write. So the way you do that, you use the identity and access management service to define those permissions. And within the identity and access management, there are two important concepts. One is the user itself. So let's say if you're getting started on AWS, you probably have a username and a password that you use to either log in using a browser, or if you're using the API. So there are two ways to use AWS. You can use the browser, use the graphical user interface, and it's a very good way when you're experimenting to go that route, is where you click, you get some context help, then you probably need a username password to log in and start. Or if you're using an API, all of our services have an API, so you can programmatically use them. If you have an API, then maybe you have an access key and a security key that you need that's assigned to that user. And so that's what an IAM user is, right? And then our user will have a bunch of permissions to do things. The other concept, sort of slightly related, is this concept of a role. A role is different in that it is also about permissions, but you don't specify a password or a secret or anything like that. The way you define a role is by specifying a policy. And a policy explicitly tells you if someone is given this role, and you can give the role to a person or an AWS 7, if someone gets this role, what can they do and what can't they do? So let's say if I created a user for Casey in my AWS account, by default, he will not be able to do anything, but I want him to be able to go and read from a database. Then I need to create a role with a policy that says, if someone has this role, then they can go and read this database. I create that policy and then I assign that role to Casey so he can go and do his job. Someone is asking, are you hiring? Yes, we are always hiring. We can talk about that in the end. Here's an example of what a policy might look like. So essentially it says, what are we doing? Are we allowing or are we denying? In this case, we are allowing. And the action is S3, which is one of our storage services. So we are essentially on a S3 bucket, which is a storage service called example bucket. We are saying that we should be able to list the items in this bucket. So if someone has this role, they will be able to go to example bucket and list all the contents, all the things in there. So that's about security. And then I talked about this concept of elasticity and pay per use, right? Or pay for what's running. Now, the great thing about cloud is you don't have to have everything running all the time, right? It depends on the need. You can scale up to support the increasing demand, or you can go down if the demand is less. If you use the serverless options, then a lot of these happens automatically for you. If you are using more of the self-managed way, then you have to design for these kind of architectures. Um, and again, elasticity also means not only the demand from external customers, right? So let's say in your own, if you're doing a personal project and you only work on that over the weekends, then you don't have to have those services running Monday to Friday. You can switch them off. Or if you work for an organization that where you sort of have more or less a core time where the development team works or the test team works, then you only probably should be running your development or your test environment during those times, and then you only pay for what you use. And then what it gives you is sort of this model, right, where there's no wastage. You're only paying for what you need. So if the demand goes up, there's a peak business demand for something, your services scale up, you pay for that. But as soon as the demand goes away, you're still not paying for it. You sort of just pay for what's needed. And if you compare to like a traditional environment, if you know that there's a big event, you're launching your product, there would be a huge demand on the first few weeks, you need to buy a capacity to to service the demand. But as soon as the demand drops, it's probably a wasted money because no one is using it. So that's
Chris, to also mention
yeah,
something because of the fact that you're only using the computers like needed at that point in time, it also helps on the sustainability of the business overall. Like because if you think about the concept of carbon, that emission or whatnot, it's because you're not over provisioning, that
yeah,
constantly. It means that
yes.
the sustainability and green footprint of your business also goes down. I also wanted to bring to your attention a question. Any suggestion on how to secure IAM put role policies so it can't be modified to privileged actions? So this is would be privilege escalation.
Yeah, I mean, there are various ways to do this, right? I didn't dive deep into security, but
Yeah,
when you like let's say for an organization, I imagine this question is from someone who works in an organization as opposed to working solely on their project, right? When you work in an organization, ideally what you would do is when you create these accounts, they are structured in a hierarchy, and they belong to a central unit called an organization, and you would start to control permissions from there, right? What we call service control policies. So you define some policies at that level to say what people can't and can't do, and then again, as you go lower into defining individual policies, there's this other concept of permission boundaries, to say if I give someone this permission, then this is the boundary around which they can operate, and they can't do more than that. I think it's a maybe that's a good topic, Casey. We can, as a separate discussion, we can have around how do you control the level of security uh,
yeah.
people have
Yeah,
in an organization. Yeah.
I really want to do an IAM deep dive session for a full 15 minutes. Get someone from the IAM service team and just get them to just go like absolutely ham and go into a deep dive in IAM because it is probably one of the deepest services we have. The amount of
Yeah.
stuff you can do in it is quite mind-boggling, but it's also not fully intuitive. So having a session like that would be great. I agree.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is I talked about logging, and logging is not just for applications, right? Logging from a security point of view is also important. So uh, in AWS, we have this service called CloudTrail, and every time someone takes an action, either using the GUI or an API or any action, it gets logged in CloudTrail. So one part of doing security is how do you ensure, for example, like that question, that no one gets a privileged actions, or they do more than what's desired. But the other part of it is, if it does happen, what do you do? So the first thing is you should ensure that all all your user actions are logged, and then we have tools that can detect and provide you insights around that something like that has happened. Someone has done beyond what they should be doing, and we have services like AWS config, where you define a rule to say, okay, this is what you expect to happen in your environment. So let's say you have a storage service S3 in your account, and you say, for this particular storage service, for this particular bucket, I don't want um, I don't want this size of object to be written into the bucket, right? I don't want, you've probably defined a role that this is what people can do, but you don't want this kind of object to be written, maybe from a cost point of view. Then you can define a config that sort of tracks that when that limitation is removed. So you can do things around not only how do you prevent people escalating their privileges, but also how do you put mechanisms to know if things are going beyond what people should be doing. Yeah, so that's sort of that was my the foundational things you need to know in terms of presentation. I want to spend more time actually showing stuff. Uh, so I want to show you cost control, and I want to show you a website. Now, I will quickly show you what I wanted to show you for the website. Casey, we are here for an hour. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll probably be talking about training and a couple of things. So got about 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Okay, so I think we might not be able to go to the basic website demo, but maybe for another time. But I highly encourage you to look at the hands-on tutorial, getting started building a basic website. And it looks like this, right? You have a website. Maybe you have a website today, some HTML, some CSS, some JavaScript, which talks to an API, and then API is talking to a database. In this tutorial, you can do it in half an hour. But the idea is you can use a bunch of serverless applications where you host your HTML, CSS, JavaScript on AWS Amplify, which is a service. You build your API with API Gateway. You write some a business logic code in AWS Lambda, and then it talks to a DynamoDB database. So all those services that you see at the bottom are serverless services, and you don't have to think about provisioning a machine. You don't have to think about patching or scaling, anything like that. So maybe for another day, let's jump into cost control. So I'll stop sharing this screen, and then I'll share another screen. Uh,
Yeah, and while you're doing that, I'll jump into filter. So, to the question about whether or not we're hiring, yes, AWS is always hiring. Like some place in the world where we'll be hiring roles. In New Zealand, in particular, we are definitely hiring. I think we have something like 20 open roles at the moment for various different job titles. So yeah, definitely just go to was it jobs.amazon.com? I think it is, or somewhere in there. Just do a quick Google for it, you'll find it, and then and the filter just say for New Zealand if you're in New Zealand, or if you're looking at this in Australia, then also just filter by Australia. So we do hire people straight out of university or like juniors. That's normally in the associate roles. So if you see a role that says like associate solution architect or something like that, or ISR or something of that level, then yes, that would be a junior level. They normally actually say on it junior, and if you're looking for more of a a coding type role, such as STE or a pro serve, then yeah, there are definitely junior roles available there as well. If you just have to look for them, they might not necessarily be in New Zealand, but I said there will be a role someplace around the world open for it in some point.
cool.
And yeah, if you're also abroad and you want to come back to New Zealand or anything like that, we do have an AWS New Zealand technical LinkedIn group that you can attach yourself to, ask questions via, and yeah, also just apply to New Zealand based roles.
Yeah.
Cool. I will.
Yeah, and
Because
I'll just add one more thing, right? I'll encourage people who are looking for jobs at AWS. Look at our leadership principles. That is how we operate day to day, and it guides us how we do our work. So definitely, if you're looking at jobs, look at our leadership principles. That will give you a lot of insight into how do we operate as
and in
individuals
the
and
meantime,
organizations.
I'll give a link to that LinkedIn group as well. Over to you, Chris.
Cool. So when you start AWS, working with AWS services, now again, this is very relevant if you're just starting out, right? And you don't want to exhaust your credit card budget. But this is also important if you already know AWS, right? What approach do you take to learn about cost? So a great place to start is, let's say you want to use Amazon API Gateway, right? A great place to start is just go and look at the pricing page. All our services have a pricing page, and there are different ways where our services are priced, but mainly the way it works is it's either how long it has been running, how long it has been computing something for you. If it's a storage service, then how much data it's storing or how much data is moving in and out. uh, for some services, you get like a free tier. Or a lot of services you get a free tier or like a 12-month free tier, or in the free tier a certain number of calls would be free. So for API Gateway, you might get like 1 million calls, which are free, and then we charge after that. There are very few services that actually have a subscription model. So we have a distributed denial of service called Shield Advance. So for a service like that, where you might get some dedicated people to help support you, there would probably be an yearly amount that you pay. But otherwise, for most services, it's the amount of time something is running, or some amount of times it's storing data, or the amount of data it's moving in and out. So these pricing pages, they usually uh, give you sort of a guidance around how it's priced, and sometimes they also give you an example. Okay, let's say for example you're doing blah blah blah, uh, then maybe this is your cost. The second step is use the AWS price calculator. So again, price calculator is just an estimate. Sometimes you might not know the amount of requests you'll get, the amount of data you'll store, but if you have some idea, then it tells you whether you are going to spend in the tens of dollars or thousands of dollars. So and again, this is a free tool to use. You choose your service. So let's say I want to use API Gateway, want to get a sense of pricing. uh, you choose the region where you want to run the service. Now pricing is slightly different in different regions. And then you provide the parameters that are relevant for pricing. So I'm saying, okay, I am doing personal experiments. Maybe I'm doing something, thousands of requests, and I feel like I don't know, maybe I'll get one. Let's do million, and I'm thinking I'll get 1 million requests per month. Uh, the average size of the request would be, I don't know, let's say 50 kilobytes. Um, and if you want to look at other things, you can. It gives you options of how the calculations are done. But if you build a HTTP API with 1 million requests per month, and each request is that much, then roughly $1.29 per month. That's pretty cheap. Uh, but again, if you're building an API, you might be building other services. So you can, in your estimate, you can combine services and sort of look at like what a total bill might look like. Now, again, that's just an estimate. The best way to do this, and I recommend this to anyone starting out. So I've logged in here on my AWS account. That's my account. The first thing you should do if you're starting out is, and if you have not seen this screen before, uh, this is the AWS console, or this is the GUI that you can use to use AWS. We have a whole bunch of services, a lot of them. Uh, if you want to try and avoid being overwhelmed, then use the search feature for what you're trying to do. I'm trying to find something with cost, and I'll go to Cost Explorer. Um, Wait for that to load on. There's lots of things that are there. I'll come to some of these things later, but I'll right away jump to budgets. So I say to people starting out on AWS, especially if you're doing personal projects. I remember years back when I started AWS on my own personal account, and I still have the budget notifications coming to me. I set up a budget, so I know I'm not spending more than I should be. And then here you can go and create a budget, and I'll walk through an example so you can understand how this works. So let's say I've just started. Again, another point I'd like to give for people starting out, actually 2 pointers. When you start with AWS, there'll be so many options, right? Because we cater for millions of customers for any type of scenario. But when you're starting out, if you want to be not overwhelmed, go with the defaults, go with the recommended options, and still if you need some help, most of the GUI has some context help built in. So here, if you really want to choose something else, go in and read up on this. But what I will do, I'll choose the cost option, which is essentially a dollar amount. And to create a cost budget, let's say my daily uh, demo, call it whatever you like. At what period do you want the budget fit for to track? So it can be daily, monthly, quarterly, or annually. Let's start with daily. And then do you want this budget to continue forever and then at some later stage come and delete it, or you could just come and expire the budget itself after a period. I'll just say it keeps going. And I can say it's a fixed budget. I can give an amount. So I don't know, depending on which cafe you go to, a cup of coffee uh, daily is what I want to put my budget to be. Or if you have already started using AWS and you don't know what you should start with, there's another option called auto adjust. And what it does, it gives you an option to look at your historical spend and sort of suggest an average. So if I say, okay, just look at my last 6-day average, and then give me an amount, comes to about $6 or something like that. So I'll go back to a fixed amount. I'll say $5. Yeah, $5. Now here you can choose all AWS services, or I can filter on a specific AWS service. And I'll show you this one when we look at the monthly budget. But for now, I'll say track all my AWS spend. Again, advanced option, you can choose the default. What unblended here means is the costs are shown when they are charged to your account. Now, there are some services where, for example, you know you're going to use the service for one whole year. Then you can buy that whole 1 year's worth of service all at once and get a big discount. If you do something like that, then in the budget, what you'll see is there'll be like one big spend on the first day of the month and nothing for the rest of the month. And that's what will happen if you choose this option. But if you want to spread that cost across the entire year, then there are other options to choose. But for now, we'll just say I'm looking at unblended cost, which is the cost as it is charged to your account. So I go next. I've created my budget. Now, what do I do with this? I will create a threshold to say, okay, maybe when about 95% or even 100%, you choose the percentage depending on the amount when that threshold is reached. Now, for daily budgets, because the way budget works is it needs to track all your costs for the entire day, but by next day, the budget refreshes. So there's no way to forecast to alert you on forecast. It's based on actual amounts. So I'll say 95% of the actual. So it's saying as soon as $4.75 has been charged to my account, or I've used that amount worth of services, set send an email that has happened. Now, if you're an organization, there are options to hook this notification to a notification system, and you might take an automated action based on that. Or you could, let's say, if you're using Slack chat rooms, you could send the notification there. Won't do any of that. So you have a budget, all done, and then it'll start tracking your budget. Now, because I've already exceeded the amount for today, it is telling me that I've exceeded my budget. Now, maybe you are not coming into the AWS console to look at this every day, and that's why you will get an email notification to say, hey, you've exceeded the budget. If you choose other periods, then you get different options. So I will do the same exercise. Let's say I say my monthly budget now. So let's say monthly budget region, and I'll tell you why. Uh, I'll say monthly. Um, Again, it's a recurring budget. Now instead of doing a fixed budget, I will say a plan budget, because what I'm thinking is instead, and when you do plan budget, you can put different amounts for different months. So what I'm thinking, okay, there's AWS reInvent. I saw announcement of a new service. I really love to use that service, but sometimes what tends to happen is when we announce a new service, it's available on a few regions and not all the regions, but they very quickly become available on all the regions. But you really want to try this service, so what you do is we will restrict this budget to a particular region. But what you're also saying, like, I don't know, maybe I want to spend $20 a month, and I expect that I will spend more and more as the months go by. So I'll say I expect it to grow by 10%, and then automatically, oh, actually I didn't choose anything here. And then automatically what will happen is, okay, for the first month, your budget is $20, and then it's slowly increasing because you expect it to increase every month. And then in the budget scope, now instead of doing all the services, I will say, I want a region. And let's say this service only came in, I'm going to try my service there. So I want to track that region budget separate to all the other things. So I choose that region, apply that filter, and then I go next. Okay, now you have a budget. I do the same thing. I create a threshold. Now you'll see, because it's a monthly budget, I can do things when a forecast is saying that I will exceed the budget. So I'll say, hey, maybe when there's a forecast to say I'm going to exceed my budget, when it's getting close to 90%, maybe I should be informed. So you do that, do the same thing as before. Uh, Send myself an email to say, hey, something has happened. I'll get an email. The other thing you can do is you can automatically take an action. So again, you see some note about permissions, because by default, AWS will not do anything to another service if it doesn't have any permissions. But what I want to do, I want to do something. So when 90% of the threshold is reached, not only I want to be notified, hey, something, you need to look into this, I will take an action. So I'll choose a role, and then what do I want to do? So I can apply a policy. So let's say in an organization, I have lots of web servers that talk to a database, and I create a budget that tracks the cost for the service, and I see it's really going high, and I just want to apply a policy that stops all the servers talking to the database. So essentially stopping them incurring more cost. For this particular service, let's say I was using a relational database service uh, in that region, then I just want to go and stop that database. So let's say there's a new feature in RDS which is in that region, and you want to experiment with that, but you don't want to spend more than $20, and it increases over time. And essentially you're saying, uh, in that region, stop the database if the budget is exceeded. And you can have more actions, you can have multiple alert levels. So you can have an alert on the forecasted cost, you can have a separate alert on an actual cost, and then you create a budget, similar to how we did uh, the daily one. So that's creating the budget that informs you. Once you start using AWS, then your actual cost will start to come. Then you have this option to look at the actual cost and a breakdown in Cost Explorer. And this is what gives you a deeper understanding of where you are spending the money. So if I launch Cost Explorer, uh, then I can see uh, a very detailed breakdown of my cost, right? So you can see a breakdown of cost by the different type of services. You can look at different regions. If you're using multiple accounts, you can look at by different accounts. Uh, you have options to change the period. Uh, you need to share this. You can send a report. You can create a report and send a report to someone. But this is a good way to come and say, oh, I probably had a firewall that I provisioned last year that I probably don't need to use anymore. So maybe I should go and switch that off because it's still costing me some money. So Cost Explorer is a good way to see uh, what your services are costing you today.
There's also one other feature. I'm just not going to cut you off because we are heading into the last stretches and we
Yeah.
don't want to overrun. If you group by region, it's also a really good way to find out if you've accidentally spun up any resources in a different region, and you can go and turn them off. There are other ways to track down stray resources, but they're not as intuitive than using was it the Cost Explorer here. That's answering one of like all questions. There is no default ability to so-called nuke an account and restore it to a default. There's no native functionality for that. There are third-party um, scripts you can run which enable to pretty much close to that, but again they aren't officially supported by AWS. So if you're running them in your own account, then take that into mind. That one is also how to stop changes towards KMS, AWS managed keys. That's done by appropriately scoping the permissions by that are on your roles and users, and making sure that they can't do any put actions or update actions on them. There's more to it than that, but that's in a nutshell. We don't have enough time to dive into, unfortunately. Um, but again, if you have questions like that and you do want it to be answered by AWS technical personnel, you can either reach out to your account manager or SA assigned to your account. But if you only have a personal account, like many of us do, or you don't work in an organization that has AWS, then go to that New Zealand technical community and LinkedIn group and ask your question there, because there are quite a few New Zealand solution architects there, and we'll be more than happy to get back to you and ask that question. So feel free to reach out there if you have questions. To segue into the last section of that is where, of course, a lot of this we covered a lot of foundations, and we also covered off how do you make sure you don't ruin your credit card when you are experimenting. So we every single show we show this slide, which is at the very top is AWS Skill Builder, which is really a free service. It's one of the best changes that we have done in a long time for AWS. So if you go there, you can actually choose to do a path based on, you just want to get to, a certain level of competency, or you want to learn, a particular theme like machine learning, or if you have a job title such as system engineer, for example, getting you up to speed on what services and what skill set you'll need to actually do that job or service theme, for example. So yeah, definitely I would go to AWS Skill Builder if you haven't, and have a look around for that. And at the very on the right hand side, you got the webinars for exam readiness if you actually want to get some of those certifications, which really show anyone that you are wanting to get a role to do AWS work on, essentially, that you have that competency. And at the very bottom, to assist with that, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, if you're outside of those two countries, unfortunately this will not work, but you have the 50% discount for each exam that you can then apply for and go. And if you do have any questions, we do have a few minutes, so just pop them in there really quick.
There, there, there's a question there. I'm not quite sure what the person is asking. Any tips on newbies gaining volunteer experience creating AWS sites? I'm not sure if they're asking volunteer experience with AWS, like working with AWS, or just experience building AWS sites. But I'm not sure if we have volunteer options, Casey, to work with AWS. But in terms of just having experience building AWS websites, I'd say look for our hands-on tutorials, getting started tutorials. We have lots of channels that gives you like a step-by-step guidance how to do things. But I'm not sure if we have any volunteer experience.
No, I don't think so either. Generally, the best way to learn is just to do those hands-on to do those hand-on workshops to really just what takes you through it. They really are really good at getting that experience and building out and interacting with those services. Generally in a pretty good way. Like offering services to build a portfolio.
The, is it mean like a tool to build a website? So I was going to show a particular tool, AWS Amplify, that allows you to author quickly websites, build websites, do the backend services and whatnot. So I'm not sure if that's the question. Are you after a tool to maybe reach out to us uh, after this call? My email is chrisknz@amazon.com. Please send me an email with your question, and maybe I can help you directly
Yeah. Hey,
on
it
those
seems
things.
like they want to do like what's so to speak volunteer work. So we do have a bunch of is it not for profit organizations on AWS that might actually be willing to take you up on the offer. But the easiest way it would be to either reach out to Chris and I directly, or just to the best way is to literally just join that LinkedIn group and then put your offer there, and then that means that we can link up and then put you in touch with the appropriate teams and people to see if there's anything there. But yeah, the workshops and stuff is really good.
Yeah,
But if you
and I
want
would
a
say,
professional experience, sorry, you go,
yeah.
Chris.
And I was going to say, I think the best way is hands-on, right?
Mm.
Like there's so much stuff. If you, it's great to read about things, but at some stage, I think just doing hands-on gives you that kind of experience, connects the dots for you, and then you start to make sense of things, right? Uh, so I'd say hands-on is the best way to go. The one thing I didn't mention in my talk, we have what we call the AWS well architected framework, and it has some pillars that helps you design, uh, do good design. And one of the pillar there is cost optimization that guides you, like if you are building, let's say, a portfolio of or building websites for small business owners, how do you ensure you are cost optimized for that? So it guides you into different things that you should look at. Yeah, that was good. Any if they have any other questions,
I
I'm happy
I
to
think
answer.
I think that's it. We are heading pretty much up to the hard cutoff that we have, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm been really happy with the amount of engagement we've had. So yeah, Karen, we do this every single Thursday from 12:30 to 1:30 New Zealand time. So yeah, definitely come by. We have lots of interesting topics presented by additional people within AWS or through our many talented partners. So definitely pop by, ask questions, and just keep having this great engagement. Thank you everyone for tuning up and do very much enjoy your long weekend.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks for joining us today, Chris. All right, Marty, what?
Yeah.
And enjoy your long weekend.